COVID-19 has drastically changed the lives of millions of American children. Though children are substantially less likely to be harmed by a COVID infection, schools across the nation have shut down over the pandemic, and keeping kids at home doesn't just affect them, but entire families. 56% of parents are concerned about missing work if their child's school is closed, and 43% are concerned about making up for the free or reduced price meals that their child received at school. Despite the difficulties families experienced in the spring, it looks like schools across the nation will remain closed or in limited capacity in the fall, despite the American Academy of Pediatrics strongly advocating that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. Unfortunately, the teachers' unions are forcing schools to stay closed. That's power they shouldn't have.
All right, our next half-hour discussion is on the question, is America on the brink of political and economic collapse? Normally, I would think that would be a bit of an alarmist question, but I'm actually not sure after watching the debate last night. We've got a couple of great guests here, but I have to handle the intro for the first guy myself. The man I've dubbed the Willy Wonka of politics, Michael Malice. Is America crumbling? You're one of the only guys I trust.
Absolutely, and it's absolutely glorious. And I think in far more than the debate, what brought about the Civil War and American self-segregation at that time was the Dred Scott decision. Before Dred Scott, you had the idea that the South was slave, the North was free, and they basically had a gentleman's agreement. Each side doesn't bother each other. Dred Scott's master takes him from slave soil Missouri to free soil Illinois. He sues to get his freedom. And the Supreme Court finds, no, even if you're a slave on free soil, you are still a slave, which means slavery is everywhere in America. And this was a huge problem for the North. This is regarded historically as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of all time. And after that, it was a series of dominoes. We are at a point for the first time since the Civil War, in my view, where the Supreme Court's legitimacy is about to be regarded as illegitimate, where there is not a consensus that, like, you know what, maybe we're going to lose this one, but, you know, in the main, it's a good idea to have a Supreme Court. It's becoming so politicized by both sides that this is going to, in my view, hopefully lead the way towards a systemic American separation.
Malice, not only do I love you because of your brilliant political insight, but also because you keep a picture of yourself behind you.
That's me on your show. That's a painting from Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute with the red pills.
Very nice, very nice. Mark, who do you want to introduce next?
Okay, so we have Ramesh Ponnuru, right? Did I say that correctly? And
you did.
You're with National Review, and of course, I knew Bill Buckley personally for many years, a good friend of mine. You're with National Review. National Review is officially anti-Trump, correct?
No, we were against Trump during the 2016 primaries. We've got a range of views on our editorial staff. One of the last places where you can still find people just arguing things out inside one publication.
Well, that's good to hear for sure. Now, we also have Kevin Hassett, who is the former chairman of the economic advisors to President Trump. So we assume you are pro-Trump even after leaving office. But now that you've left office and you are you with AEI, or let's see, I'm trying.
Yeah, I used to be at AEI, but now I'm at Hoover.
Oh, that's right, with Hoover. Are you in California right now? Is that the background? It looks like.
No, I'm actually a little depressed because I'm stuck in D.C. and I was supposed to be out there this semester, and so I remind myself of where I should be with my virtual background.
Yes, indeed. And
background.
Then we have Matt Welch, and he's the editor at large. I love that. That's kind of like the term diplomat or something. It sounds like you can, like the Hoover Institution, you're paid to think. Is that an accurate way of describing you?
I just wish that I had the immunity to come with it and can run through all the traffic light cameras here in Brooklyn. But yes, editor at large is the best way to describe me for Reason Magazine.
Well, so that covers all four of our characters. I would like to start with Kevin Hassett because as an economist, I don't know if you watched the debate last night or not, if you could handle the hour and a half brawl. Boy, how do you deal with a president that is constantly agitating, and is he aggressive like that in person? And what's your perspective on this? All the election betting odds say that Biden won this debate overwhelmingly. How do you see it?
Right. Well, I think that the election markets presumably were thinking that there was a chance that Joe Biden would have a complete meltdown, and he absolutely did not do that. And, I think that if you look at the substance, for me, the headline of the debate was that there were a lot of things that Biden refused to do to separate himself from things that I think moderate voters are afraid of. And so, like, the Green New Deal is a terrifying policy that would really destroy the country. And, he's willing to pack the court. He's willing to kill the filibuster. And I think that that's like the substantive news from last night. But I know that it's hard to focus on the substantive news given all the fireworks.
Yes, indeed. I'd be curious what Matt and Ramesh, what you thought of the debate. Could you handle it emotionally, survive, or will you ever watch another debate after this one? Is it even worth your time?
Alcohol is a marvelous drug, Mark, as we all know. Yeah, I have to watch it for a living. I wouldn't otherwise at all. It was viscerally unpleasant television, and arguably exactly what we deserve as a country. I think it's an accurate reflection of how lousy and stupid our politics are and will be probably for a generation. I'm not a catastrophist, cheerfully or otherwise, like my friend Michael Malice, for whom I always disagree with very, very cautiously, because he's probably right and I'm probably wrong. But I think it's more, as Johnny Rotten, that great MAGA hat wearer, once sang about the UK, we're just another country. I think that's what we have been seeing over the last, especially 5 years, and what we will probably see for the next 15, is that American exceptionalism, for good and for bad, and it's been both, we're doing the same stuff that Hungary is doing. God help us. We're doing the same stuff that a hell of a lot of countries are doing right now. We're getting into this kind of crabby populism. Right now, the governing crabby populism is of the right. We will, at some point soon, get crabby populism of the left, and it will be bad at every level of government. I live in New York City. My God, we are governed by boobs and incompetence here. It is amazing to behold. I don't see any sanctuary of good governance in this country, and I don't see any promise of a sanctuary of good governance for this country. The people who are trying to backfill and create some kind of ideological wish casting on Trumpism and hope to replace him, the Tom Cottons of the world, the Josh Hawleys of the world, they are, from my point of view, and Ramesh will probably disagree, nightmares too. And I don't see anything really good happening from it. The best thing we could say about Joe Biden, which really we can't say any really good thing about Joe Biden, is that he's a rusty weather vane, right? Like, he creaks slowly in the direction of the prevailing winds. So at least he won't go fast into the Green New Deal, but that's about it.
Matt, I know that, Dave, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I want to get to Ramesh on that, because I think it's an interesting question, what you brought up right there, which is sort of that Biden is like the bulwark, the sort of rusty bulwark against the radical leftism, and how quickly will that break? And I think a lot of people thought, he's going to get on stage last night and just melt down, and then it'll show that they're about, that the radical leftists are here. That didn't quite happen. But your second point on, these guys behind Trump, is there sort of an intellectual backing behind Trump? I'm kind of hopeful for that. Ramesh, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me say my hat's off to Kevin Hassett, who has found a virtual background that is a perfect match for his personality. I asked the question about whether I'll watch another debate again. Yes, but not with children present. I would like to see better examples set for them. I think what I saw last night was not the picture of the political leadership of a country that is about to undergo collapse, but one that is undergoing decay. And you can see that partly in the kind of gerontocracy that we saw on display. And you can see it as well, I think, in the way both parties have been running away at maybe different speeds from free markets, limited government, the rule of law, and other such principles that have made our country great. In Joe Biden's case, he has always been somebody who goes where the mainstream of the Democratic Party is. He doesn't lead it, he follows it, and that mainstream of the Democratic Party has been moving left. The online left overestimated just how far left it was during the primaries and backed a bunch of left-wing candidates who had the same misunderstanding. But if you remove the sort of distortion field of Twitter, then I think you have to objectively look at Biden's platform and say it is the most left-wing, progressive, and statist that we've seen from any Democrat for quite a long time. And I think you can see also that Biden's having a little trouble navigating these currents. You could see it in the space of a couple minutes last night when he said, "I don't support the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal will pay for itself by creating thousands of jobs. I don't support the Green New Deal." That was one of the closest things he had last night to a senior moment. But then
which, by the way, according to his own website, he does support the Green New Deal.
That's right. That's right. He, his own, JoeBiden.com says, the Green New Deal is the right framework. But when you look at Trump, you don't see somebody who is, let's say an evangelist for free markets, and whose instincts on trade, instincts on drug prices are not always aligned with free markets, not always, in my view, based in reality. And so I think that those of us who do think that there's a lot to be said for free markets and a lot more opportunities for America to seize using them, we really have our work cut out for us.
I'd like to mention a couple of things that Joe Biden said that I thought Trump could have responded to if he was truly a free market one. And that is when Joe Biden said, Donald Trump does not have a plan when it comes to health care. And of course, we're laissez-faire. We're not sure we should have a plan per se. But, he could have said, Kevin, health savings accounts. He could have referred to Singapore's MediSave program that has been highly successful. There's lots of examples. Perhaps even other countries may have medical systems that work better. Were you disappointed, Kevin, when Donald Trump never responded to having a plan for healthcare, which is a major issue among voters?
Right. I think that there were a number of points where he could have said something about what he's done and his accomplishments, and even to be a little responsive to what Ramesh said, because of free markets and competition being brought into healthcare through myriad regulatory changes that we made while I was still over there. We did things, for example, like accept a gazillion generic drugs, which made it so the consumer price index for drugs in the U.S. declined 2 years in a row. And each of those declines were the first decline since World War II. And it was because there was so much more competition in healthcare markets. And so I think that's an example of, well, of course I have a plan, but my plan is to make it cheaper. He did say that, but he could have given a better example. But there were a lot of cases like that. And I just want to give you an example that you might remember that, like when we were selling the tax cuts, I was on TV all the time. The president was on TV all the time promising that they deliver $4,000 in wages, because if you have more jobs, you have a higher demand for labor and it drives up wages. And it would do that in 3 to 5 years. Well, in 2019 alone, we got the data last week, then wages went up by $4,300 just in that year alone for the median family. And in the 8 years of Biden and Obama, the median wage only went up by $1,300 for the whole 8 years. Last year alone, it tripled the whole 8 years of Biden and Obama. So the point is, if I were debating, I would have been laying all over the points like that. And I think that he didn't do that. He made a tactical decision, basically, I think, to litigate stuff that the mainstream media has refused to litigate. Like bringing up the director of national intelligence released yesterday some documents that showed that the Obama administration was warned that Hillary Clinton was planning to set Trump up with a fake Russia hoax, right? And things like that. So all of that stuff and the Hunter Biden stuff is something that you just don't hear about at all in the mainstream media. And I guess he decided he had to litigate all that stuff because it was the way to get the message through.
So Malice, as I was watching this last night, I kept thinking, I'm looking through Twitter and I'm looking at everybody and everybody saying this is depressing, this is awful. There were very few people, even the pure partisans weren't saying, oh, my guy absolutely won. I mean, everybody was saying this thing was a disaster and Chris Wallace was terrible and the whole thing. Of course, you get some of the partisans, but for the most part, that was the general takeaway. And I kept thinking, I'm looking forward to talking to Malice tomorrow, because if someone's enjoying this, it's got to be Michael Malice, because this is sort of what you want to happen, I think. Can you explain exactly why that is?
Sure. It's those who need leaders are not qualified to choose them. So if you're sitting there as a voter and you don't know anything about politics, and these are the two choices you have, if you don't even speak English, if you're looking at how these men are carrying themselves, their posture, their body language, they're both, not acceptable as someone who's going to make decisions over whether my wife has a kid, going to war, and all these other things, simply due to their body language. I think they were both debating in very different ways. One of the things that Joe Biden represents very well, the American argument for having democracy over aristocracy was, after a while, the aristocrats kind of inbreed, and you get something like the Habsburg jaw, where you have this kind of low-hanging jaw and the people can't even talk. And there's no better example of this than Joe Biden, who was 1 second away from literally voiding his bowels at all times. On the other hand, you have President Trump, who's just like barking like an attack dog. And they should have called him Jeb Biden, because it was and I think at one point he did call him Jeb. The body language and the aggression was completely off the charts. And if you're looking at it from one of these kind of sociological aspects, it is that kind of who is a very, very old school business approach, like the proverbial Trump handshake, where he grabs people, pulls them, where you have one guy owning the room and kind of putting his on the desk and showing them who's boss. Now that might work on Wall Street, but in this context where there's soccer moms, I don't think it played necessarily well for him. But there sure were a lot of good sound bites at Joe Biden's expense, and he wouldn't even make eye contact with Trump, which just shows you how when a man is weak.
Yeah.
Well,
did you guys sense that? Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, Dave, and Michael, speaking of body language, Biden did a good job of pandering in a sense. He looked right at the camera. He smiled. In large measure, he was polite. There were some exceptions, but Trump clearly was the aggressor and constantly interrupting. He embarrassed himself. I was embarrassed. I think a lot of people were embarrassed by that. What do you think of the fact that Biden smiled, looked into the camera? It seems like that's the way politicians should act. What is the problem with Trump? He couldn't even smile the entire time. He had a grumpy look on his face the entire hour and a half.
Malice, can I
Sorry.
let me give it 20 seconds and then I want you to answer this. So my take on the Biden smile is that it's very inauthentic, actually. It's whenever Trump made what I thought was a pretty decent point, Biden just smiled it off, which is something Hillary would do. You just laugh it off as if it has no meaning. So when Trump brought up, Hunter and the 3.5 million, Biden's laughing as if it has no meaning, as opposed to addressing it, which we know it's an actual issue. But I think just one other thing on this, which is that Trump coming in so angry and so indignant, it sort of works when you're not president, but when you are president, it hit me in the middle of it. I was actually expecting him to act a little more presidential last night, which I very rarely ask him to do. Malice, what do you think?
If you go back and look at Ayn Rand, the great vampire novelist, on Donahue in 1980, her second appearance, she discusses this exact thing vis-a-vis Jimmy Carter. She says, if you watch, I'm not going to do her accent here. If you watch Jimmy Carter, he smiles even when things are supposed to be serious. It's like a nervous tick. And she makes the face. She goes, oh gosh, I forgot I'm on TV. So I think it's a very corporate thing to do when someone is saying things that are very scurrilous about you. This happened with Tulsi and Kamala Harris. Tulsi's like, look, there was a guy in death row. You had his DNA. You didn't want to be released. And she's like, oh, it's like, okay, why are you laughing? Even if Tulsi's full of crap, why? This isn't funny. This is something very serious you're being accused of. And to signal that this is something to be serious is effective with some members of the audience. But in terms of people who have some understanding of politics and the facts, it's kind of disquieting.
So if I could jump in on this, just two things that struck me as different between Trump in 2016 and Trump now. Trump often in 2016 seemed to be enjoying himself on the campaign trail. And I don't think he felt, you didn't get that last night. You get the sense that he enjoyed being an insurgent challenger in a way he doesn't enjoy running as an incumbent. The second thing is in 2016, he talked about a lot of issues that mattered to a lot of voters, but weren't being discussed by political elites, immigration being one, manufacturing jobs, the opioid crisis. I feel like he's spending a lot less time talking about those sorts of issues. He didn't bring up immigration once. The media's not going to do it for him if he doesn't do it himself. And he talked about a bunch of stuff that is more of interest to him than it is to large groups of voters. And frankly, I think the Hunter Biden thing is an example of that, because it's the sort of thing people who are totally revved up in his corner know about this issue. If they're not in his corner already, he's got to explain what it's about. He's got to explain why they should care about it. He's not talking about the stuff they already come into the debate caring about.
So Matt, maybe that gets us to the issue of who's going to win in November, since he didn't really, Trump didn't pander to the Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and those battle states. Is he destined to lose? The election voting odds increased dramatically to 60% this morning on election betting odds. Do you see any chance that the secret ballot is going to elect Donald Trump or re-elect Donald Trump?
Are you seriously asking a journalist, let alone a libertarian journalist, to accurately forecast an election?
Yes, it's you're on the spot here.
Listen, the one thing that I'll say, and this kind of touches to the comedy question. Comedy works best when you insult comedy in particular, and Donald Trump is the funniest president maybe that we've had, or at least that Ronald Reagan had some good timing too, but Trump is an insult comic, and he's very, very skilled at it, which his detractors hate to admit. But part of that depends on wrong footing, or my God, I can't believe that he had the cojones to say that in a political context where there's supposed to be this sort of other rules about engagement. And that's thrilling when you're the insurgent, when you're the outsider. It is not thrilling when you know what's coming, when you know that's what he does, when he's the president. That's a challenge he has a hard time running. He has to run against the record of himself, which is a little bit awkward. So this has been an unusually stable race. 90 to 95% of voters made up their mind 6 months ago. They're really, the number of undecideds, the number of third-party supporters is really vanishingly small. And when you look at their preferences of those people, big poll came out a couple of weeks back. Something like 47% of people who voted third party in 2016 compared to something like 20-something% said that they want to vote for Joe Biden this time around. People are coming back to the two-party fold to vote against the other bad guy. And right now that energy, including for independents, which is double-digit percentage in favor of Biden, and I think third-party voters, is all trending Biden, and that the stability of the race has just been remarkable. It's been nationally between 6.5 and 9 percentage points, basically the last 3 or 4 months. It's hard to see anything, including last night, we've had a pandemic in the meantime. It's not a small thing. That hasn't, if you look at the line of the race, it hasn't moved anything. So what could possibly move that last remaining nub of people who were persuadable to come out. I don't know that there is such a thing. And so absent that thing, it's going to be really hard for Donald Trump to win.
I think all he has to do is promise to nuke California, and he'd win 50 states, because even the Californians would be like, well, it's tough but fair.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, I think one of the things that we on Wall Street really appreciate is gridlock, but the way the betting is now, the Democrats are going to sweep in November. If that happens, where's the economy going? I mean, Chris Wallace, he came up with this crazy statistic that you're going to increase jobs and all kinds of economic growth through these high tax, high spending policies. One thing I did think Joe Biden did bring up that I thought was pretty good, or Chris Wallace did, are we going to have a V-shaped recovery or a K-shaped recovery? I thought that was a really good question, because some people are being left behind. I know my daughter and her son-in-law, my son-in-law, they're both unemployed. They worked on cruise ships. Restaurants are going under. So there is that K going on in the economy. Entertainment is down. Publishing is down. Meanwhile, technology and online and Amazon are going through the roof. Is the economy a K recovery or a V recovery? What's your view?
You know, I think that the really big question is Biden actually going to pursue the policies that he's embraced in order to get the left to support him? And at National Review over the next week or two, we're going to be going into a lot of work that Casey Mulligan at the University of Chicago and I have been doing on this. But there's just so much stuff that they've proposed that is humongously harmful to the economy. And I'll just give you an example that they're increasing the payroll tax for people above 400,000, or they're exposing all income above 400,000 to the payroll tax, which is a 12 percentage point increase in the tax rate for small businesses that employ more than 40 million people. Right. And so it's like one of the most catastrophic proposals that I think anyone's ever seen in terms of the economic harm that would cause immediately. And nobody's even talking about it. And so I think the question is, does he actually pursue that stuff or does he not? And I think that if he does, then there's no telling how bad the economy will get. Casey and I are going to estimate that the reduction in GDP is going to be in the 8 to 10% range once you aggregate all his policies and look at the economic effect.
Wow.
Were you guys all expecting Biden to just collapse? I think partly what happened last night was that everyone expected Biden to just implode. And I think partly why Trump was so angry and sort of off kilter right from the beginning is he went in for the knockout punch right at the beginning. And I think when it didn't happen, and when Biden surprisingly was able to string some sentences together without losing his place, and it only happened once or twice and on some pretty minor stuff, I think Trump didn't really have a backup move, which was, we got to dance. We got to do this for a couple of rounds. And he just kept going and going and going, and it never came around.
We should have asked Dr. McCullough what kind of pills Joe Biden was taking, the uppers, to keep him doing really well. I agree with you. He did not blunder at all, really.
Well,
I think it's
what do you guys make of that?
I think it's crazy the extent to which the Trump campaign team has spent the last 5 months trying to sell the idea that Biden is a senile, drooling moron. If that's the case, you let Biden make the case that that's true. You let Biden talk uninterrupted and let him show that that's true. You don't lower expectations for him and set the bar so low that he's bound to exceed them in practice. And that's what they've done. I think it's been a real strategic blunder on the part of the Trump people.
And if it's going to be about oral skills, oral presentation, that's going to be kind of a wash, people. I mean, it's not that I think Trump is cognitively sharper than Joe Biden, but he doesn't clean up very well. You don't want to invite him home for Thanksgiving. It's he doesn't know how to behave, right? There are people I know who exist in the world who said, that's how I think that behavior should be in the real world. There are some, but they're not many, right? So like if you're going to make kind of your presentation skills a big thing, I don't know, man. He's just in the same way that, having Donald Trump as your salesman for anti-socialism. How about someone who didn't grow the size of the annual federal budget by nearly $1 trillion in 47 months?
Yeah, it's really kind of funny to have Trump attack, the Green New Deal. It's $4 trillion when he's spending $2 trillion. So $2 trillion is reasonable, but $4 trillion is insane. He doesn't have a lot of credibility there.
Well, Malice, as the guy who gets the trolls more than anybody, maybe except for Trump, were you surprised that he didn't have a backup move, that he didn't have some sort of, I didn't knock him off in this first half hour, I better change tactics at some point?
No, I think I'm not the only one to point out, and I'm sure Kevin has experienced this on a personal level, that Donald Trump is pretty much pure id, and that he only does have very few tactics. We've seen him restrain himself at various times, like during the Kavanaugh hearings, he kind of held his tongue. And there were certain other instances, but I think on a very visceral level, he has that New Yorker's contempt for people that he perceives are weak. So if he's yelling at this man in his face and saying just really scurrilous things, and Biden won't even look at him and it's just kind of laughing it off, I think at a very visceral level, it triggered him to just go harder and harder and harder. It's like, come on, stand up for yourself, because this is someone who, by all accounts, when he would find some blog making fun of The Apprentice, would have meetings and would talk for 15 minutes ranting, like, do you think this is true? And people couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that he cared that some random jerk on the internet had a negative opinion of him. So I think that's what we were seeing there. And in one sense, Biden got the best of him that way.
There was one other thing. Kevin, his own experience. So you're the only one who's really spent a lot of time with Trump. Although I understand that you were not always in the room, so to speak. That he didn't really like economists. Is this true?
No, that's just not true. No, I'm sure I saw him about as much as anybody in the 2 years that I was there. The thing I can say about and so now I'm not excusing rude behavior, because I hope you've never seen me engage in it. I don't know, maybe I have. Certainly privately to Ramesh, but I think that one of the dynamics that was interesting was that Vice President Biden was saying things that were just patently false. And then Wallace was not saying, well, wait a minute, that's disproven, things like that. And so then Trump was interrupting to say, oh, no, wait a minute, I didn't actually say that. Or, no, that's you're taking it out of context. There were so many of those. Whereas, you got to admit that the moderator was interrupting President Trump and saying, no, wait a minute, that's not true. There's no problem at all with mail-in voting, even though, we actually have convictions. That you can actually go, and there's a website where you click on the state and you can see all the mail-in voting convictions. And there's many in many states. Now, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, a national conspiracy to steal an election, but the idea that worrying about fraud and mail-in ballots, given that we've found in New Jersey the mailbox filled with hundreds of them and so on, it's a reasonable thing. And to have the moderator basically sort of say, oh no, that's just discredited, that's disproven. That's the kind of night that he was having, and I think that he was getting very frustrated with that. And I think getting frustrated is probably not a good debate tactic, but it is astonishing how many just false things that Vice President Biden said right at the beginning. And then, in terms of the projection that Democrats do, he then turns and calls the president a liar left and right.
Yeah, and very quickly, just want to say, we keep talking about the importance of preserving the integrity of this election, and then as soon as he brings it up, it's like, oh, that's ridiculous, there's no problems. It's like, well, which is it?
Yeah.
Right. Or even, the critical race theory question, when Wallace framed it, it was as if critical race theory is anti-racism, but if you've been paying any attention to it, it's actually instilling racism in our institutions. And I think Trump sort of faltered there because he's not the greatest explainer of ideas. And then he got hung up on this white supremacy line. And that seems to be, from what I saw this morning, that seems to be the thing everybody's getting caught up on.
He's also not the greatest haver of ideas, Dave. I think is a problem here. I'm not sure he understands what's happening in the Ibram Kendi universe.
Right, but again, think about this. That we right now, if we were going to think about what are the top 5 things if you got to interview Joe Biden that you would push him on, then none of those came up. None of them, not one. Right. And then when they did ask him, so would you stack the Supreme Court and do away with the filibuster? He refused to answer. He said, oh, I'm not going to talk about that because then everyone's going to talk about that, or it's about what he said. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Wallace just let it go. he just let it go. I mean, talk about being in the tank for somebody. I mean, I thought it was disgusting. And it's something that we've seen in every Republican debate forever and ever and ever. You just go back and look, George Stephanopoulos asking about taking away contraception and so on. And so I think that it really is a problem in the debates. And I think it's one reason why Trump has sort of burst through with his super aggressive behavior, because people recognize that the moderators are in the tank for the Democrats.
To defend Chris Wallace for a second, I dispute that he's in the tank. I think he did a lousy job last night. I think that pretty much everybody would have done a lousy job last night who isn't intimately familiar with worldwide wrestling or something. But I don't think that he's in the tank. I think he's a serious journalist who had a bad night.
He had a bad night. Okay, so why was he just so deferential to Biden and not even asking him any hard questions? And then when he got even close to a hard question, he just dropped it. I mean,
Biden cannot be allowed to get away with this excuse that it's a distraction before the election to talk about his plans for after the election. That's what an election is supposed to be about. And that excuse on court packing works for any inconvenient issue that any candidate doesn't want to talk about. It is just the most transparent thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.